Hello, I'm Karl Wells, and this is Point to Point. My guest today is the Honorable Edward M. Roberts, 11th Lieutenant Governor of Newfoundland and Labrador, a former politician, lawyer, writer, author, volunteer. He's been a witness to many chapters of Newfoundland history and has participated in it. After law school, when he graduated from the University of Toronto, he was very quickly hired to be the executive assistant of Father of Confederation, Joseph R. Smallwood. And Edward, if I may call you Edward.
I've been called a great deal worse, please. Yeah.
It's lovely to have you on the program.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
You grew up in the late 40s and 50s.
Well, I was born in 1940. Yeah,
right.
so.
I'm just wondering what, if anything, you remember about the night when Newfoundland became the 10th province of Canada.
Well, I do have one strong memory. I was 8 years old, and my mother, who was a Canadian, I'm the son of a mixed marriage. My father was a Newfoundlander by birth, my mother a Canadian. They met at Dalhousie. And she tucked me in that night, so 8 years old. And she kissed me goodnight. She said, "When you wake up in the morning, you'll be a Canadian." And it's always stuck with me. I mean, yeah. My family, I think, were strongly Confederate. My father and my mother both went at Dal. My Uncle Charlie, who was a doctor as well, Dal. So there were lots of uncles and aunts, or great uncles and great aunts of mine, who were living in Toronto. So that's my strongest memory.
Now, when you were 14 years of age, you moved away from Newfoundland.
Well, no, I was sent to school in Ontario.
You were sent.
Okay. I was sent to.
You were sent to a boys' boarding school, St Andrews,
place
in
called
Ontario.
St Andrews, in a town, then a small town called Aurora.
Yeah. Now, this was during that transition when we were going from being
the fall of '54.
A small independent, or a country that had lost its independence, actually, to the new province of Canada. So here you were in Canada. Were you looked upon as an object of curiosity by the other boys
I guess
and
to
the
some
teachers
extent.
there?
I was the only Newfoundlander in the school. There had been lots there before, lots after, but I happened to be the only one. I was called Fish, inevitably. It didn't bother me. My graduating class was 1957. Which is a long time ago, and every now and then we have a reunion, and they'll still call me Fish. You know, everybody had a nickname. But no, it was different. There were lots of things different. For example, we had 50 cycle power in Aurora, so your lights flickered. They had it in Newfoundland on the west coast because Deer Lake made it. They made 50 cycle, but they didn't have the 60 cycle that we have here today and had then. When we had toast, the butter came white, or the margarine came white, with a little packet of yellow that had to be mixed into it. You know, there were things like that. But no, I was always proud to be a Newfoundlander, and it took a certain amount of ribbing, but quickly.
Well, Newfoundland at that time, especially before Confederation, was, well, it was seen as risible by many Canadians.
Yep.
We were looked upon as country bumpkins.
Yeah. Well, I think, I mean, that's correct, but I don't think that particularly bothered me. I wasn't an athlete, but I did relatively well in my studies, so I could hold my own there. I was 2 years younger than my class. I was 16 when I finished grade 13, and most of my class were 18, so that was a bigger impact, but I managed to overcome that, and it toughens you up a little.
It does.
And I think I can say from time to time can have a sharp tongue, and not afraid to stand up for what I believe in. So there were good years, and I think if I'd had sons, I would have tried to send them to St Andrews.
So, unlike your dad, Dr. Harry Roberts, who's a very famous Newfoundland surgeon, and other members of your family who went into medicine, you ultimately decided on law. Why?
Well, it took
was
me a while
that?
to get there. My first year at the University of Toronto, I was in pre-meds, but it soon became obvious that this was not a match made in heaven. So I did an arts degree, and then I did a graduate year in history, but I really edited the Varsity, the student newspaper, 4 days a week. It was the second largest morning newspaper in Toronto. The largest was the Globe. There were only two of us. And then I went into law school. I liked politics. I liked argumentation. Maybe my mind works from time to time in a legal way. And the U of T Law School was a wonderful place to be in. These were our golden years. One of my professors was Maura Laskin, became Chief Justice of Canada. Caesar Wright, there were great names. And we were a small group. There were only 75 of us, I think, at the start, and 60 graduated. So it was a wonderful experience. And of course, I then came back, became a member of the bar, and didn't really practice for 15 or 20 years.
Yes, because after law school, you went to work for Jack Pickersgill, who was MP from Bonavista to Twillingate.
And the minister from Newfoundland. And then came back, and I'm not sure how it happened. I'm not sure whether Mr. Smallwood asked me or I asked him, but I became his executive assistant. Now, I had been active in student politics. In the early 60s, only the small game laws protected the Liberals nationally in Canada. And we had a model parliament in Toronto, and a bunch of us organized, and the Liberals won 2 or 3. Mr. Pearson used to show up. There were only 50 MPs, many of them French-speaking from Quebec. And I got to know people and got interested in politics. Anyway, I went to work with Mr. Smallwood in '64. And I won't say the rest is history, but it all unraveled from there.
What were your duties as executive assistant to J.R. Smallwood?
I'm not sure I knew. I'm not sure he knew. Whatever had to be done, if it meant carrying a suitcase, and there were 2 of us, I carried the suitcase. But I traveled with him. We became quite close in many ways. He trusted me. I trusted him. We had an interest in politics and in Newfoundland history. He had a very different knowledge base than mine. And I was interested in policy. So I worked with cabinet ministers, helped, whatever had to be done. Anybody looking at the Smallwood papers, which are over at Memorial, a treasure trove, if you look at a letter signed by the Premier, and there were lots of them, and you look down in the lower left-hand corner, if you don't see JRS, Joseph Smallwood, /BD for Betty Duff, or the lady who typed it, I drafted that letter. If I drafted, I didn't put down ER, just, and he would sign them or not sign them as he saw fit, or he'd amend them. So I did whatever had to be done. And it was a wonderful, I was there for 4 years, and then he called me in one day after the election. I'd been elected in White Bay. You would have been elected in White Bay. I was elected. The Liberal candidate got elected, me. And he said, it's time, I'm going to have to ask you to take a demotion. I looked at him, he said, yes, you've got to win the cabinets. Well, I became a minister. Yeah, there were 4 or 5 just brought in.
Yeah. So this was the 1966 election.
Yes, I came into the House of Assembly in '66.
I wanted to ask you about that because it's been said that you were one of the people who was involved with modernizing that campaign.
Yes, I had
How was it modernized?
I had got to know, through the Canadian University Liberal Federation, I was the president for years, the Cross Canada Federation, the men who were running, and I think they were all effectively men. Judy LaMarche was very active, but Keith Davey and Mr. Gordon and Mr. Pearson and Dick O'Hagan and Jim Coots, the people who were organizing the National Liberal campaign. Now, when I say I got to know them, it was a mountain and a little bump, but you know what I mean. And I had become aware of the new techniques. This was the days when we all read Theodore White's The Making of the President in 1960.
Right.
And 1962 and 63 campaigns. So I knew these people, George McLaren George Eliot, at McLaren's. And Mr. Smallwood was looking for new ideas, new techniques. It was his 6th election. So I was able to bring them together. We produced, not equals, but a wonderful piece of campaign propaganda. The front cover was a four-lane stretch of the Trans-Canada. It's out near Norman's Cove, and glossy and pictures and good, the professional television commercials, all of that. So, in the absence of the blind, in the kingdom of the blind, the one-eyed man is king. Well, I guess in that sense, I was a one-eyed man with modern political techniques.
Didn't you pretty much wipe out the Tories in that election?
Yeah, there were 42 seats, and the Liberals won 39.
Yeah.
There were only 3 Conservatives elected. And Mr. Smallwood had told me, and he told others, and I think he believed that this was going to be his last election. And so that's what happened in 68. A bunch of younger people, some of whom were came into the House in 66. Aidan Maloney, John Crosby, Alex Hickman, Bill Rowe, Bill Callahan, myself, John Nolan, a bunch of new faces. And
do you think he had it in mind that he was going to have kind of size you all up over a period of years and maybe pick one of you to be his successor?
Well, we used to joke among ourselves that the next premier, I mean, it was a joke. I think he genuinely realized that he should never run again. And someday maybe I will write the story of what happened, in my opinion. Because, as you know, he did run again, disastrously, for himself and for the party. And he would sort of parcel it around and play one off against the other. It wasn't nasty or unpleasant, but it was quite obvious. And Steve Neary would be the next premier, or Bill Callahan, or John Nolan, or Bill Rowe, or whoever. Nobody took it terribly seriously. And then at some point he changed his mind, and it became very serious.
He was in '66, I guess. He was at the peak of his power. He was still a very
intellectually,
influential,
politically.
Did he intimidate you at all?
Not really. I mean, there's no question. He was driving the horse and cart, and I was riding in the horse and cart. No, I mean, I was impressed with him. He was genuine. He had his weaknesses. We all do. He knew Newfoundland. He cared for Newfoundland. He had ideas for Newfoundland. Remember, I was reading recently a piece I wrote some time ago. There have only been 2 premiers of Newfoundland since Confederation who came into office with a vision. One was Brian Peckford. I don't agree with his vision, but he had one. The other was Joe Smallwood. All the others, some more successful than others, but all the others filled the job and had ideas and did what they did. But Smallwood had a vision for Newfoundland, and it wasn't new. You could go back. He wrote a book in I think it was 1930, called The New Newfoundland, potboiler almost. But you can read it there, and you can just hear him in the 1950s and 1960s. And he was genuine. He believed in what he was doing.
Yes.
Did he become case hardened? That's another story.
Now, it was only a few years later when the bloom kind of went off the rose. His popularity was waning. College-age students had kind of turned against him. You were, I believe, Minister of Health, and
I was Minister
quite
of Health,
busy, no doubt, with that portfolio. But with the changing political situation, was there any sense that Smallwood and other members of cabinet were quite concerned about what was happening?
I think so. He knew what was happening. And remember, he had said he intended to get out. And then the Crosby-Smallwood leadership came on. And I'm not saying that was the cause of the change, but that was the symbol or the symptom or the consequence of the change. And things became very different after that.
It got a lot of attention, that convention.
Oh, yeah.
National broadcast.
Here was, he announced...
It was a modern political convention.
He announced he wasn't going to run again. And he resigned as leader, or sent in word he was resigning. And then Dr. Rowe put his name in, and that wasn't going to fly. Crosby, John Crosby, decided he was going to run, and John, most of us were not prepared to see John as leader. In fact, John never got to be leader of a political party. His son, Ches, has, but John never got to be leader of a political party.
Then, of course, in 72, that election,
Well, I took Smallwood's defeat.
he lost.
Well, he lost in 71, resigned.
Yeah.
I became leader.
Yeah.
Frank was premier, Frank Morris, and there were guys on roller skates going back and forth across the house, Tom Burgess and Huey Shea and a bunch like that.
Yeah.
And it was obvious there had to be an election. Well, the good news for me is that the election came on very quickly.
Right.
In March 72.
Yeah.
And we had no chance. So,
Yeah.
so I took Smallwood's defeat. And then we began
And
to
it
work
was
on
his defeat.
Well, it was. Oh, no question in my
Absolutely,
mind.
yes.
Yeah. I mean,
It was his
if you'd
defeat,
been
yeah.
leader
That's
of the
right.
party, the same result.
Yeah.
People just said,
Yeah.
it's the Liberals are time to go.
So here you were leading the Liberal Party, and you had to rebuild the Liberal Party for the next election. Was that a daunting challenge?
Well, I think
for you?
if I'd ever tried to analyze it, it might have been. But no, I said I took it on knowing there had to be an early election. I didn't know how or when it would happen, but knowing. Terrified I had to become, if I had become premier, relying on the likes of Tom Burgess or Huey Shea, as your support in the House was having, But prepared, I was 1972, I was 32, prepared to put a number of years to make, and believing I could. Well, we nearly did in 75.
Exactly. But then Mr. Smallwood decides that he hasn't had enough.
Well, remember what happened in between?
Well, he challenged her
In
leadership.
74,
Yeah.
the Liberals had Liberal conventions every couple of years for leader, and the leadership was open. Fine. He ran, and I beat him. And of course, he never forgave me.
Yeah.
And in 75, he decided to form his own party. Now, that had nothing to do with him becoming premier.
The Liberal Reform
Party. It had everything to do with me not.
Yeah.
And he was prepared to see the Liberals lose the 75 election
Yeah.
out of a personal
Yeah.
dislike or quarrel with me.
Yeah. And there is absolutely no doubt whatsoever but that if that Liberal Reform Party had not been a part of the election, the Liberals would have won.
Well, I've always believed that,
Yeah.
but we'll never know.
Yeah.
Mr. Smallwood, and then the sequel was in 77, the fall of 77, another leadership convention, and Bill Rowe won. Well, I'm not trying to denigrate Bill, he won fair and square, but Bill Rowe, Roger Simmons, Steve Neary, and Joe Smallwood.
Yeah.
It was Smallwood's revenge, and that's fine. I mean, that's if you're in politics, you've got to be prepared to take your stand and take the good with the bad, or the bad with the good.
But I want to take you back to election night 1975.
Oh, I remember it well.
I was
at the Battery.
I was in Kilbride at a friend's house watching it on television, and you were at the Battery Hotel, your headquarters, and in a live interview after it was obvious that the Tories had won.
I was angry.
You were very angry. You were frustrated, and I remember you saying to the interviewer, "The old man took it away from us."
I forget the words I used, but I said this
what was going through your head at that time?
Two things had become obvious to me. One is that we had a very good shot at winning the election, a very good shot. And secondly, that I had the impossible task of trying to convince people that Mr. Smallwood was not the Liberal. I'd won the Liberal leadership fair and square and beaten him, in fact, as we've said. But he was going around the province saying, doesn't matter which Liberal Party you vote for, and trying to convince people that voting for Joey Smallwood in this election is not a vote for the Liberal Party. Very difficult. In fact, impossible. Now, would we have won if it was just myself and Frank? Well, we'll never know, but I think we would have. And certainly that night, I was very angry. I don't think I'd lost my temper. I don't think I'd lost control of myself. I knew what I was saying.
No,
Very
no,
sad.
you were quite in
Yeah.
control.
saying that, this was Mr. Smallwood's revenge,
Yeah.
and so be it. And so I settled down to carry on as leader of the opposition for a while.
And you stayed until around 1985.
I stayed in the House.
In the House. Yeah. Then you went back into the law, or went into the law.
Well, I didn't run in the 85 election, Carl,
Yeah.
because I knew, or I believed, I was quite confident, I knew maybe too strong a word, that I would hold my seat in White Bay. The people of White Bay had voted for me 6 times, 5 times, 6 times, 6 in all, in 6 tries. But I knew the Liberals were not going to form a government. And I said, I've had my fill of this, and so I went to work with, actually it was Alec Hickman called me
Okay.
the next morning after the leadership loss and said, what are you going to do? And I said, well, I don't know, Alex. I got a wife and a couple of children, and I lost half my income, in effect, as leader of the opposition. So I got to work as a lawyer. Well, he said, why don't you come down to my old law firm? Alex wasn't a member of the firm, but it was Harold Halley, Hickman, Hunt, Adams, I guess.
Yeah.
Alex was Minister of Justice at that stage. I think he was, 78.
Yeah.
And so that's how I ended up with the firm, which I've been with for 40 years.
And then you come back into politics in the 90s.
Well, that was Clyde.
Yeah.
I think Clyde was the best premier we've had since Confederation, bar none, because he faced up to reality and he tried to do something about it. And he did. He was very successful within that. But Clyde, Paul Dix left the portfolio of justice, and I was doing very well at law. I had good money, enjoyed the work. I was 2 cases which were going to the Supreme Court of Canada. Every lawyer's trial lawyer's dream. And Clyde rang, would I come to see him? Well, he and I had been in the cabinet together and been friends for many years. So I went in and he said, Paul is leaving, not the House, leaving the portfolio, leaving the cabinet. He had a situation to deal with. And would you become Minister of Justice? I thought of it. It was the Constitution. I mean, I admire Clyde. I admired him then. I admire him now. And the Constitution, Joe Clark, remember, and Meech Lake and all that. And Clyde had a vision of Canada, which is the same as my vision of Canada. It was essentially, that the government of Canada is the government of Canada, and the provinces are part of that. But, I won't go through it all. And I went down to Labrador and got elected in Goose Bay. It was called Nescopy. It was number 7, and then ran in 93. But I said to Clyde, I said to my wife, to Eve, the day Clyde leaves is the day before I leave. Well, she called me on that, and she was right. So then I went back to law full time until.
So I'll bring you forward now. You become the 11th Lieutenant Governor of Newfoundland and Labrador. I admire what you did when you were Lieutenant Governor, because you really opened up Government House to the public.
Well, people were paying for it.
It was their house anyway, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And the land surrounding it, you opened it up to the public. Did you always have that idea going in?
Not really. In fact, when the Prime Minister called and Jean Chrétien and said, I'm going to appoint you as Lieutenant Governor, I knew my name had been looked at, but I had no idea the call was coming. Brief conversation with Eve, and all right, the answer was yes. And then got there, and I'm not sure where the inspiration came from. It may not have been mine, but let's have people in here. We canceled the formal invitations for the garden party. Anybody could come. The dining room at Government House, when it's all dressed with the crystal and the, was, I think, the finest venue in Newfoundland and Labrador for that kind of meal. And we were able to do things. I was at Gower Street Church a couple of Sundays ago. There was a christening, and one of the men came up, one of the, I guess, grandparents came up afterwards, said, I haven't seen you since I was at Government House for dinner. And I said, well, you'll have to help me with a lot of people. And a labor leader, he said, you had the Federation of Labor executive in. and he was a lady, just retired, and he's a labor leader, and he said, we'd never seen the inside. I said, well, that's wonderful, that's why you were there. And when the Governor General, Madame Jean, came, instead of having the protocol list, all of whom it matter, of course, instead of having the protocol list, we made it our business to ask young people or different people, people who normally would not be at dinner in government. And I think even I would do it again. And Judy Foote is doing much the same thing, you know. She's having Tai Chi lessons and what have you, that's fine. But it's a wonderful place, and it's there to entertain people. It's not just a place for the governor to live.
I have to ask you one final question. Yeah. What was it like meeting the Queen?
Oh, memorable, memorable. It doesn't matter who you are. She's a very attractive, pleasant lady. We met her in Buckingham Palace. Easy to talk to. She remembered Newfoundland, remembered her, what I guess will be her final visit to Buena Vista, 1997. It was cold. I wasn't there that day, but bitter, cold wind. And she said, but we didn't mind weaving. She said, Philip and I didn't mind, because it was the last day in our tour and we were on our way home. But memorable. I mean, this lady, she's been queen now for 64 years, is it? 65, whatever. We'll never see her like again, and that was one of the great moments of our lives.
Well, I'd like to thank you, Edward Roberts, for being on Point to Point, and thank you for your contributions to much of Newfoundland's history, and hopefully you're not done yet.
Take care.
Thank you
Enjoyed
very,
it
very
immensely.
much.
Thank you.
Thank you.